All right, hello everyone. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us on this rainy day. You guys know the drill. Actually, is this their first EC workshop by chance? Maybe? Hopefully. Okay, awesome. Welcome. Well, it's basically a chance to learn from different experts in the community. We bring in advisors, different business leaders who have a specific knowledge around a certain area, and just enable a chance to learn alongside fellow members, and also have little snacks in the meantime. So today is EC advisor Christy Pruitt-Haynes, who I'm just going to let her kind of talk about her bio and herself a little bit. But she's a mentor here at the EC, meaning there's various programs and things you can take advantage of to kind of sit down one-on-one and learn. But she's awesome, graciously providing this workshop to us today, all around communicating you to a yes. So without further ado, just give a round of applause. Welcome, Christy Pruitt-Haynes.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for being here. I know you're probably here for the free food, but you have to put up with me in order to get the food, so hopefully it'll be worth it. As he mentioned, my name's Christy Pruitt-Haynes. I am one of 4 Nashville natives left in the entire city. I'm sure everyone in here is probably from somewhere else, so I was actually born and raised here. So it's been really cool for me to kind of see the evolution of the city, particularly with the Entrepreneur Center. When I was growing up, this didn't exist. So the whole idea of entrepreneurship was kind of foreign to a lot of people here, and it brings me just a lot of joy to be a part of the EC. So we're going to jump right in. As you know, we're going to talk a little bit about ways to communicate to get to a yes. And I think most can agree, and if this doesn't apply to you, let me know, because I'd love to hear more about it later. But most people, when you go to ask a question or make a request or even just have a simple conversation, you have some idea of what you want the outcome to be. And you're really hoping you can persuade that person to see things your way. And that's how most people address communication, particularly when you're asking for something. But there's sometimes a challenge that keeps you from getting the result that you want. One of those things may very well be the way you're asking. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. We're going to break it down pretty simply, have a lot of fun in the process. I will say now, if you have a question, please ask it in that moment. I will forget what I said if you wait 5 minutes. So I want this to be interactive. I don't want to just hear myself speak. So feel free when you have questions, inputs, or if you want to challenge something, push back a little bit so we can have that dialogue. So a little bit about me. I'm a business person who knows human capital is the way to get results. So my background is in human resources, but I also done a great deal of work in strategy and diversity and communications and several other areas. But I know at the end of the day, the differentiator for any 2 organizations are their people. And anytime an organization has a problem, the answer is within that 4 walls, within the teams that they built. So it's really incumbent upon organizations to invest in their employees and to give everyone there the ability to use their own voice. As an entrepreneur, it's even more important because you're oftentimes getting new customers or gaining new employees or new partnerships, whatever the case may be. So being able to communicate is going to be that much more critical. I believe all days should start with coffee and end with Cabernet. I have yet to have a bad day that I started with coffee and I ended with Cabernet. Depending on how the day is going, the Cabernet may get moved up a little bit and the coffee gets moved back. Feel free to switch the order according to what you have going on in your life, but that is just my personal tidbit for each of you. It's the key to happiness. I joined Mensa to win an argument. I say this just so you all know, I really like being right. Apparently, I am not right all the time, according to my husband, but he isn't here, so we're going to say that I am. Several years ago, and this is just to let you know how much I will dig in to be right, my ex-husband and I, emphasis on the ex, were having a discussion about whatever it may be that we were discussing at that moment. And he said, "You think you know everything." Well, I obviously, kind of did at that moment. So I was relaying that conversation to my mom, and it's like, you know what? He just thinks he's so smart, but I know I'm smarter than he is. And she's like, "Oh yeah, back when you were a kid, you tested out of the park on your IQ test. Why have you not told me this? Do you know how much I could have bragged about this? In every argument, oh, you have to listen to me." So I dug through, found the results, sent them in. was able to join Mensa as a result of it and took way too much pride. I have since humbled myself a bit, but took way too much pride on sitting that plaque on the mantle and saying, I may not know everything, but I know more than 98% of the people in the world. So there. We filed for divorce not soon after. So I don't recommend that as a course of action, but I proved my point. I am fluent in sarcasm and cynicism. This is not the way to effective communication, but I have teenagers, so it's the only way to get stuff done sometime. And I sincerely believe that the biggest part of getting what you want is knowing how to ask for it. And that's what we're really going to talk about. And I really, truly do believe that. There are most things, and I'm not going to say this is going to work 100% of the time. Please don't come back to me and say, I asked somebody for $1 million, and I asked it in a way that I thought they were going to say yes, and they didn't, so now you owe me $1 million. I can't promise that, but I can promise it's going to make a lot of those situations a little bit easier. So let's dive right in. First, I want everyone to think about one question that you are dreading asking somebody. And I would even say, if you feel comfortable, going ahead and writing that down. And maybe it's not that you're fully dreading it, but you think it's going to be difficult, or you don't know how to approach it, or you've asked before and you've always gotten a no, and you need to try and find a new approach. So just take a moment and think of something that it is that you need to ask. And this can honestly be professional or personal, whichever is a little easier to come up with an example. And jot down just one question that you really want to come back to a little later, where we can sort of strategize on how to approach that. So I'll give you a few minutes to do that. And by minutes, I really mean seconds. I don't know why I said minutes. It shouldn't take that long to come up with your one question. All right. I think I still see a few ink pens kind of wiggling around there. All right. So for now, just park that. We're going to come back to that question towards the end. But as we're talking, kind of think about it in your mind and sort of visit back to that. But we're going to address it in a few minutes. Now, part A, this is an excuse to throw a picture of my two favorite people in the entire world in my presentation. But it really does serve a purpose. Think about how you asked a question when you were 5 years old. So go back. I'll give you a few minutes. I know that's further back for some of us than others. But think about when you were a little kid, 2, 3, 4, 5 years old, and there's something you really, really wanted. There are a few things that kids just naturally do. I know with my youngest especially, she will come to me and say, when she was little, and she's 15 now, it's a whole different ball game. But when she was little, she would come and she would lay her precious little head on me. And then she would say, Mommy, I love you so much. I was like, oh, thank you, sweetie. And she would walk away. Then a few seconds later, Mommy, do you know you are the best mommy in the whole wide world? I'm like, oh, thanks, babe. And she'd walk away. Then a little while later, Mommy, can we please have pizza tonight for dinner? Whether she got a yes or a no, her goal was, I'm going to butter you up, I'm going to play to your emotions to try and get what I want. Now, if I said no, she would then go to my husband. Now, her approach to him was naturally different. She would go to him and say, wow, I bet you've had a hard day today. We should really order pizza so nobody has to cook or clean. What she was doing was paying attention to what mattered to each of us. And kids naturally do that. If you have kids, how many of you have gotten the notes home from teachers that talk about what angels you have? And in that moment you think, are we talking about the same person? Because when they're here, they're totally different. Kids know to naturally switch their approach depending on their audience. But something happens from the time we're 5 until we become 25 that we become much more ingrained in who we are. So we ask things and we approach every interaction in the way that we want to approach it. We lose that whole idea of tailoring the request for our audience. And there was a book written many years ago, Everything I Needed to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. This is one of those moments where I think that really does apply. Go back to your toddler self when in doubt and phrase things in that way. Don't throw a temper tantrum. Not that part of the toddler side, but the part where you really recognize how to approach a situation. So let's talk a little bit about your personal communication style. Now on your tables, on most tables, there are 4 sheets. You can either look on the front of the sheet and take this quiz, or if you want to do it online, you can go to this website, take it that way, and then it will score it for you. So you can do that on a phone or a tablet or a laptop. Take the quiz. It should take you only just a few minutes. How much? Are there any extras? If there are extras, I'll distribute those to the back. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Anyone back here? Perfect. There we go. Oh, there we go. There you go. You're welcome. Any other questions before we start talking about the profile a little bit and the results of it? Okay, just to give me an idea of the makeup of the room. If you are a driver, raise your hand. Any drivers? 1, 2, 3. Say 3, I think. Okay. If you're an expressive, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. If you are analytical, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. A lot of analyticals, okay. And if you are amiable, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, interesting. So something that I noticed just from that, and then we're going to talk about the results a little bit more. And I don't know if you saw it. When I asked the expressives to raise their hand, they went flying up in the air. They were going to reach for the ceiling and swing for it if they could, because that's a very expressive thing to do. I am an expressive. All day, I am one of those, while I say there are no absolutes, if there were, I would be an absolute. So we'll talk about what expressives really mean, but that was just an interesting observation. That I like, they were, here I am, don't forget me, I'm back here. The analyticals were still very direct. There was less facial expression, it was just matter of fact, yep, that's what I am. The amiables were a little slower to raise your hand. I didn't see as many, and the hands did not go as high. And the drivers were, yes, I'm that, what does this mean, let's get to it, right? So before we get into this, I want to say, all styles are good. Every style is successful. Every style has pros, every style has cons, and every style is necessary within an organization. So I like to put that out there because sometimes people will start thinking, well, oh, this sounds better, this sounds like it would be easier. There are some tasks that are easier for certain styles than others, but every style can accomplish everything in their own way. So let's get to it and talk about them all a little bit. So here are the 4 styles that we have: analytical, driver, amiable, and expressive. And we talk about what separates them. So you'll see on the horizontal axis the difference in asking and telling. So on my right, your left side of the board, for our analyticals and our amiables, they tend to ask more questions. They're going to be the people in the room who want to understand all of the numbers. They want to understand the process. They want to understand and kind of really dig into the data a little more. They have a lot of questions. They may not be the first person to speak up in a meeting. Doesn't mean they don't have wonderful ideas. They're just taking it all in, right? And we need those people, because without those question askers, some of the folks on the other side of the spectrum are just going to run and not have all the information necessary, right? So it's very critical to make sure that side is represented. in meetings sometime, and this is just a side note, because they aren't always the first to speak up, people can assume they may not have anything to add. The majority of the time, I have gotten some of my best information and best ideas from that side of the board, because they're going to think before they speak. I don't do that. I will be the first to say. I will talk and speak and think out loud and then figure it all out later. But that's an expressive trait. I'm going to talk about all of these in generalities. No one is an absolute on any of these. So on the other side, we have our drivers and our expressives. They're going to tell you things. They're going to tell you what needs to be done. They're going to tell you how they feel. They're going to tell you what their expectations are. They can sometimes come off as rude. I can have an entire conversation with somebody and never ask them how they're doing. And it's not that I don't care. I genuinely do. I'm just used to talking because that's what I do. So I have to be very cognizant of that, and I have to sort of take a step back and remember there's another person taking up space in this room, so I need to make sure this is a two-way dialogue and not me just sort of rambling on to them. Then when you look at our vertical axis, you have controls emotions and shows emotions. So at the top, your analyticals and your drivers, they're going to control their emotions a little bit more. They tend to have a little more of a poker face, right? I don't. I can't play poker for that reason. If I get a good hand, it is written literally all over my face. I'm the person who will go all in just because, I'm going to win this way too soon, like no strategy whatsoever. But I know that about myself, so I avoid poker tables. But for analyticals and drivers, they're going to be a little more reserved, a little more fact-based versus emotion-based, right? Whereas your amiables and your expressives, they like to know that the emotions are there, that everyone feels good about the process, everyone was a part of the process, that we're all getting along. This is probably the people who will start singing Kumbaya in the middle of a meeting, right? So it's a very interesting dynamic. A couple of things about the four quadrants. You'll see that analyticals and drivers share a component, drivers and expressives share a component, et cetera. The two that it is usually hardest to sort of wrap your head around and kind of get along with are the people who are at your diagonal. So for example, I'm an expressive, which means I'm going to show a lot of emotion and I'm going to tell you everything. If you look up here at the analyticals, they don't show emotion and they ask a lot of questions. So for the point of this exercise, they are my opposite. So I know when I am having a conversation with an analytical, I have got to change my approach. I have to lower my volume. I have to not use my hands as much. I have to stick to the facts of whatever it is we're talking about. It doesn't mean I'm cold. It doesn't mean I don't say, hey, how's it going? What'd you do this weekend? But once I do that, then let's move on and talk about what it is we need to discuss. My husband is an analytical. It makes for very challenging conversations or lack thereof. Conversations are really me talking and him listening. Luckily, that works for me and it works for him. So, but it can still be challenging if we have something we need to figure out together. The same is true for drivers and amiables. They're the complete opposite. One's going to tell you what to do and not going to show any emotion about it. The other's going to ask you questions and want to make sure you feel wonderful about it. So those are sometimes your most challenging relationships. Let's move on and talk a little. Any questions about this before we move to the next thing? Perfect. So a little bit about each of the four, and I'm happy to email all of this to you. This is a lot of words, and it's honestly a lot more words than I ever like to have on a slide, but just to sort of go through some things. Our analyticals and our drivers, so the upper two quadrants on from our chart before. Analyticals are going to be low assertiveness, low responsiveness, and what they mean by responsiveness is the asking versus telling. That doesn't, or the emotion side, it doesn't mean they don't respond. Technical specialists. So a lot of times these are going to be the people that you really need in the room when you're trying to solve a problem. They're going to ask very specific questions, prefer objective, task-oriented, intellectual work. They want to be right, so they collect the data. And what's interesting is all 4 of the components really like to be right. They just go about it in very different ways. Analyticals collect data to be right. And I'm going to talk about some of these quadrants or some of these dimensions in their most extreme form. Analyticals will collect data. Drivers will just tell you this is the way it is. Period, point blank, this is what we're doing. So obviously they're right because everyone's going to get on board. So you can see some of the analytical traits. Going on to drivers, high assertiveness, they're control specialists, they're very decisive. Sometimes one of the first people to make a decision in a situation. That can be good because they can push things forward. It can be bad because sometimes they can make those without having all the necessary information. They're cool, independent, they can be competitive with others. A really low tolerance for feelings and emotions. My sister is a driver. We'll talk about this in a little bit. So me going to her and saying, oh, I just don't feel like doing anything and I'm really sad and I don't know why. At some point her eyes will glaze over and she will say, suck it up, buttercup, and get it done. You know, and I just know this about her. So we're good yin and yang for that reason. Drivers tend to work very quickly and impressively, especially alone. They seek esteem and self-actualization and great administrative skills. So just a little bit about those 2. Then the other 2, amiables, support specialists. They can be slow in making decisions or taking action, not because they don't have opinions, but because they like to have group collaboration and they like to know that everybody's on the same page. They can support and be active listeners to others. They can be weak in goal setting sometimes, again, because they want that input from everybody else. Wonderful counseling and listening skills. Then our expressives. We're the social specialists. Spontaneous actions and decisions. Love to be involved. We can exaggerate and generalize. Tend to dream, can jump from one activity to another. I am guilty of that. I will be the first to admit it. Has good persuasive skills, can seek esteem and group identification, and likes to work quickly and excitedly. So this is just a little bit about the 4 things, the 4 types that we're going to talk about. So let's move on and figure out how you can quickly identify what other people are. So you don't have to, because you're not going to walk up to everyone and say, hey, can you take this test so I can figure out how to ask you this question that I really need to ask you, right? So let's talk a little bit about how to figure out what people are, and then how to tailor your approach based on that. So I know who I am, but who are you? I know I'm an expressive. So what I recommend everyone do is think about people in your personal life who fit each of the other components, each of the other types. Because those are the people that you know the most, and it's pretty easy to recognize those traits in them. And that makes it that much easier to then pick it up in other people that you're dealing with. Because you can think about, how would my mom react in this situation? I can tell my mom is an amiable, so what would she do? So for me, these are my people. My mom, she's an amiable. She wants everyone to get along. She will be the first person who is just up in arms if we are not all eating together and having these wonderful kind of kumbaya moments together. My sister I mentioned is the driver. Let's just get it done. Let's get it done now. Let's move on quickly. And my husband is the analytical. He's going to ask a lot of questions. He's going to research something endlessly, where I feel like, we could have made 14 decisions by now and just bought the new doorbell that we need instead of you spending 19 hours online researching every single doorbell ever created under the sun. But that's his process. And while he takes all of that time, but then picks the perfect doorbell, I would have gone, bought one, realized I didn't like it, gone back to the store, bought another one, and done that 3 or 4 times, but felt really great about it because to me, decisions were being made and we were moving forward. So think a little bit about your personal life and people who fit into each of those categories, because once you can identify them, and I'm going to have you write them down in just a moment, it's going to be a little bit easier to pick it out in your professional life. So if you look on the back of your sheet, you will see this guide. So take a moment and think about someone in your personal life who fits each of those traits. And I say, go ahead, write that person's name down And if you want, even write one or two things about them that makes you feel like that's who they are. If you're having a hard time figuring out what they are, think a little bit about how they behave in a social setting. If you're all walking into a party, the expressive's going to walk in, they're going to talk to everybody in the room, and we're going to wave their hands. Sometimes people have accused me of looking like an air traffic controller because I talk with my hands so much. But that's what expressives do, so that's just part of how I communicate. Your drivers, on the other hand, they're going to have a goal in mind. They're going to walk in, they're going to see the 3 people they need to meet, they're going to talk to those 3 people, and then they may be ready to go, right? Your analytical is going to sit back, look around the room, take all the information in, figure out, okay, this is the person I need to talk to. Let me think about my approach. What do we have in common? Now let me go and make my introduction. But it's going to be very thought out and very targeted. And then your amiables are going to go back and forth a little bit. The people that they know, they're going to go to them very easily and talk to them. And the people that they don't, you may see them, that's the person that you'll see kind of standing sometimes around a social circle, maybe not jumping in because they're waiting for someone to invite them in, but they're there because they want to be a part of it. They just aren't quite sure how to jump in because they don't want that to feel awkward and they don't want to offend anybody or hurt anyone's feelings, but they really want to be a part of that conversation. So write down your people. Most people have some folks in mind. Anybody want to share whoever they wrote down that is their opposite person? So if you're an analytical, they're an expressive. If you're a driver, they're an amiable. And tell me anything about your interaction with that person that sometimes has been either really challenging or really easy. That hand went up quickly. Yes. What's your style?
I'm an expressive.
Okay. Yes, that's why your hand went up quickly.
Is an analytical.
Uh-huh.
And I thought about what you said about doorbell. Every time we buy something, he does that. He even does it on vacation.
Yes.
So he's like, you pick that hotel. I think we should get this one. And I'm like, we're going to be okay.
Yes, yes. I feel your pain. To all the analyticals in the room, I love you. I need you in my life. You make my life better, but you also drive me insane. Because, we do the same thing on vacations. Like, does it really matter? Does it really take 2 hours to research all of the different meal plans? Let's just eat when we're hungry. How about that? Let's just trust there's going to be a restaurant when we're hungry. Well, no, we may not get the best value if we do it that way, and we might save 17.3 cents if we do it like this. Fine. Let's walk the 3 extra miles to save the 17.3 cents. So yes, I feel your pain. And again, I'm talking I'm talking real life for me, but I'm talking in extremes in general for all of the signs. Anybody else want to share? Yes.
I've got a question.
Yes.
People on the middle here between expressive and analytical, like a little combo.
Yes, you can. So everybody has a secondary style. I'm glad you asked that. Your secondary style is typically the one that comes out in times of stress. So when the going gets rough, this is sometimes what you go to. So I'm an expressive all day, every day. But when I'm under stress or when I'm up against a deadline, I become a hardcore driver. And I will just say, forget all this talking. I don't care how you're doing. This is what we need to get done. Do it now. Why hasn't it been done? Blah, 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 blah. And that's my default go-to when I'm really, really stressed. But when I'm relaxed and I have the luxury of time and the ability to just be me, I'm going to be an expressive in every form of it. But yeah, so you will sometimes see 2 scores that are really close where it's kind of like you're on the line, and usually that's your secondary style kind of coming out. And if you think about some situations, you may be able to realize, there was this time taxes were due at midnight and it's 11:58, and this is what, this was my go-to option. So that's a lot of times what's coming out there. Any other questions or situations that you're willing to share? Leave it to the expressives to throw one in. That's what we do. I'm sorry, was there anyone else? Did I miss? Yes.
I'm not really squarely in any of the quadrants, and I think a lot of people that I know aren't on the extreme end of any of those spectrums.
Yes.
I'm like right in the median between analytical and driver, and I can see characteristics of myself on both sides, and it depends on the situation too. So
what do you do if you don't mind me asking?
IT.
Okay, so yes.
CIA.
Yeah. So IT people, my best friend is in IT, has been all his life. I love him to death. He is analytical in many situations. He also has these moments where he's just like, let's just get it done. Because the profession tends to be, and correct, let me know, how you react to this, tends to be pretty black and white. Something either works or it doesn't, right? And there's usually a right answer to something. Sometimes the process can be a little gray, but there's a definite point you're trying to get to. So knowing that there's something is right and something is wrong, that's when his driver side kind of comes out. And it's like, we just need to figure this out and get this done. And a lot of people are in the middle. I'm kind of the exception in that I am so extreme to one side. But even those kind of middle of the road folks are still going to have a natural tendency that when I am sitting back on my couch and my feet are propped up, this is kind of how I'm doing life and communicating. Other questions, comments, concerns? Yes?
Do you find that the bottom part of that quadrant more than the top, like, or do you find, sorry, I'm gonna phrase this.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find that there's, the genders kind of fall into certain roles more than not? Because I'm thinking of the different people in my life, and like, it's not everybody.
Right.
80% of the guys are all in the top half of that quadrant, and 80% of the women are on the bottom.
So I find that men tend to score at the top because they've been socialized to think in that way. But when they get super comfortable and they've had a couple beers, then the truth comes out. Women are socialized to be either expressive and let's talk about how you feel, or let's all get along and hold hands and be that amiable. So there is a bit of kind of or influence that society and just the way people are raised and kind of those gender roles do come out, but it really takes kind of sitting and thinking. And what I sometimes will suggest people do is have your friend, have a really close friend or a spouse or parent, whomever, take the test for you and see how they score you. Because sometimes that's the truth. And it's really because we have an image of ourselves, but sometimes that image can be heavily influenced by what we think the world wants to see in us and how we've been raised. But feel free to the website, and I can go back to it at the end of the presentation. Jot that down, send that to someone, and have them take it and say, when you think about me, which one of these do I fall into for you based on our interactions? And see what they say. And it can really have some interesting dialogue. Or if you're an analytical, or they can just send you their data points and kind of back it all up, or whatever the case may be. But it can be a really interesting way to kind of get to the root of who you probably are. But great question, and there definitely are some differences, based on how you're raised. There's the whole nature versus nurture thing. Other questions, comments before we move on? Yes. Mm-hmm.
And anyone who knows say I'm more of a driver. However, for the expressive, I have a mother who's expressive,
Yes.
and that's an absolute nightmare.
Yes. Yes. And it can be. We are a lot. Like, you know what? I will own it for every expressive out there. We can suck up the energy in a room sometime. I mean, it's just the truth. I happen to love it, but it can, I have no doubt I drive my husband insane. Like, absolutely no doubt about it. He drives me insane too. But I am sure after spending, if he's been at work and he comes home and we sit there and we're watching TV, it will drive me crazy if we're sitting and watching TV in silence. Like, I want to talk about what's happening on the TV and what's going on. And, well, why do you think that character did this? And you know what? That reminds me of when Marcus did this. And do you remember, did it? So my mind is racing. And he's like, can't we just sit and watch the darn show? So yes, expressives are a lot. God love your mother, But so with that, though, do you find that when you're around her, you shift how you do things? Or does it make you say, you know what, never mind, I'm just going to step back and not deal with this? Not to put you on the spot, but. I'm putting you on the spot.
It kind of depends on the situation. So like, for example, when I turned 16, my dad put us in the basement and put me in it.
Here you go. You're on your own now. We'll send food down every now and then.
We're gonna put a bedroom downstairs. You guys cannot be on the sixth floor. And now, as an adult, I moved back home. He passed away.
Mm-hmm.
I moved back home. And when we got a house, we actually have a house that we're in the house together, but it's split. First floor is the house, but it's kind of makes you think of a duplex.
Mm-hmm.
So we share a front door, and we both have our own living room. We can go into, so she goes in her side, we share the kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
So if I have friends over, I can take them to the upstairs living room. I've got my own office, everything is just there.
That is the key to happiness.
It is. So much space, but, I love hanging out with her, I love all the stuff that
Right,
we do,
right.
and we have conversations. We unfortunately are in business together now, and that
That dynamic can be challenging.
extremely, because she's like, we're saying the same thing, but you're not getting my point.
So my husband and I talked about going in business together. We decided not to for the sake of our marriage because we just thought that was going to be too much of each other, right? But when we were really pursuing that, one of the things we thought about is how can we divide the tasks based on each of our strengths, right? So I know the stuff he's really good at, and I have to acknowledge that. He knows the stuff I'm really good at, and he acknowledges that, and we just kind of define our lanes and try to stay in them as much as possible. I will be the first to say the mother-child dynamic is going to complicate everything every time. Like, even if y'all were the same style, it was still going to, there's still going to be some interesting moments there. But we are going to talk a little bit about how you can sometimes flex and when it's necessary to flex to try and get her to see things your way. And hopefully she in turn will do the same sometime. But it's challenging. And I would love to say I can wave a magic wand and y'all will be absolutely wonderful. But there's always going to be some moments where you bump heads just because of your different approaches. What it really comes back to is reiterating for each of you, the end goal is this. So I may get to it this way, and you, with your expressive nature, is going to get to it this way, but we're both going to get there. But yes, there can be pain in the process. Other questions or comments? Okay. So this one is also on the back of your sheet because I wanted to make sure you were able to take this home. So this really talks a lot about each style, and I don't know why my lines and words are off. That's going to drive me crazy a little bit. Ignore that. Pretend everything is lined up perfectly. But this is going to talk a little bit about how you can approach each style based on what it is they need to do and hear and see and experience. So if you look down at the line that says support there, you'll see if you're a driver and you're approaching them to request something, you want to really support their conclusions and their actions, right? Kind of start off with, we're in agreement, this is where we're trying to go. Or the result is we need to double our sales, by May of 2020, whatever that might be. Reaffirm that you're on the same page, you have the same goal, and then go in with the request. So they know we're going to reach the same conclusion, and that just honestly makes them typically kind of relax a little bit. With expressives, it's more about kind of the big picture idea a little bit, Like I want to sit and kind of, let's talk about the possibilities and let's come up with the big picture idea. I am not a details person. I am the person who will have an idea for the best conference ever created on the face of this earth, and then I will forget to book a conference room because I don't do details. I genuinely don't. One of my very first blogs was about the first assistant I ever hired, and I hired another expressive because our interview was like the most fun I had that week. We talked about some of everything. I could tell you where she got her nails done. Like, we instantly became the best of buddies. We literally accomplished nothing. We had so much fun, like truly. It was like the most fun I've ever had in my office. But we got nothing done because we're both all up here with our heads in the clouds talking, and we came up with great ideas, but no one could implement them. So I was like, you know what, I found someone else for her to go work with, and I went and I hired me an analytical. And I just had to learn, okay, I'm going to communicate with them by email with bullet points. Because when I walk up to her desk and I start talking, I can see her like physically backing back. Because I was just too much. And I'm like, okay, I'm kind of old and I'm not really changing, but we need to get this work done. So I would start the day with kind of a bullet point list. Here's what I'm thinking today. And she could respond that way. And it worked. And we got a lot of good stuff done. But I had to realize this is on me to make this work. I need to flex to her style. And, me and the Expressive, we still went to lunch probably once a week because we're truly still friends to this day. But it was the worst hire I ever made in my entire career for that reason. So amiables, talk a little bit about relationships and feelings. So think about the person who's your amiable. So for me, it's my mom. I know if I want her to do something, I can go to her and say, I think and she doesn't really like eating out. It's not her thing. I could eat out every meal of every day. She feels like we should cook at home. I was like, I think if we all went out to eat at a restaurant where we can all be around the table and no one really has to focus on the cooking and the cleaning, we can really talk and learn about what everybody did that day. She's all for it. I know if I say to my husband, I have researched this restaurant and it has a 4.9 out of 5 scale, rating, and they have a 30% off coupon right now, and they have food that meets everybody's preferences. He's all for it because I've done my research. But if I took that same information to my mom, she was like, I don't care what the rating is. It would not have the same effect. So that's where this chart can really come in handy, and that's where the idea of flexing to another person's style and phrasing your question to them in a way that's going to appeal to what matters to them, right? It's not about the numbers for everybody. Sometimes it really is about the feelings. Sometimes it's a combination of both, but you've got to be able to tell, how do I cater for each person? And some people feel like this is being fake, right? You'll hear, well, this isn't me showing up with my authentic self, because that's the big thing right now, right? We all want to be authentic. It is authentic because your goal is to get what it is you want, right? This is just the process. And we've already talked about how nobody is all of one sign. So there are going to be moments where you use different aspects of your personality because that's what you need in that moment. Okay? So it's still authentic. It's still you. It's the same request. It's just asking in a way that they can hear it. So really pay some attention with this chart. Another line here that I really like, present benefits that tell, for the driver, you want to tell what? What is it that we're doing? For the expressive, who's going to be involved? Who's going to benefit from this? For your amiable, why are we doing this? We're doing this to save the world and the whales and whatever else we're going to save. And for your analytical, how are we going to accomplish this? What's step 1, 2, 3, and 4? That's the information you lead your question with. You lead with the benefits that are going to really resonate to that individual. And again, please spend a little time with this chart because it really can be very beneficial. Questions about this before we move on? And I know we're getting really close on time. Yes?
On present benefits, what is the difference between what and how?
What is the end result? How is the path? So for example, the what may be, if we do this, we're going to grow our revenue by 20%. And then you may offer some supporting data to back that up. Whereas the how is, we need to start taking all of our salespeople through sales training in month 1 instead of month 3. And then from there you get to, because that will grow our revenue by 20%. Other questions? Yes?
And keys to determine a prospect's particular process. I mean, I'm
Yes.
So how am I gonna say, okay, she's analytical, and therefore I can kind of go down that path?
Body language is huge.
Okay.
Yes, body language really does tell a lot, and that's something people don't pay attention to as much as I think they need to in communication. In my body language, I cannot hide that I'm an expressive. I mentioned it before when I asked everyone to identify their style, and you saw the expressives. I mean, there really was a visible difference. So pay attention to that, because those are things people don't cover as much. People sometimes really work on their word choice because they're very cognizant of it, but their mannerisms are very different. And I can look around the room and see mannerisms in people. For example, I'm sorry, I don't know your name, but when she spoke and she said analytical and driver, my gut was, I see more analytical, because her demeanor was analytical. And I remember you were a driver. You sit like a driver, because she has a very, and this is not meaning other people don't, but you look very confident. You're like, okay, I'm here, and you can look at her facial expression. It's serious, not cold, but like, all right, what are we doing? Let's get to this. So there are a lot of cues, and this is where it's really going to come in handy to think about someone you know personally, and then pay attention to everything they do. So if you need to follow around your, wife, daughter, son, whoever, for a day, it's like, I'm just observing, just checking you out, watching you to see what you do. And you're going to see some telltale signs in them that when you then look at another person that you know, this person is clearly whatever other style, you're going to see those differences, and that's going to help you pick it up in people really, really quickly. Yes, other questions?
What is the line before growth needs to?
So in order for them to develop, like for their interpersonal growth, a driver needs to listen more. So for them to go from being good to great, they got to improve their listening skills. An expressive needs to kind of check and verify things. I can't just go with my gut, because my gut is always going to be whatever's fun. So I got to do a little research. An amiable needs to just pull the plug, just do something, initiate an action, etc. So, yes. Other questions? So, real quick story. I'm sorry, yes.
Yeah, if you were to add a third dimension to that analysis, have you thought about, what might add some extra boxes to this extra characterization?
Ask me your question in a different way. I'm not quite getting it.
So you've got assertiveness and responsiveness. And
Yes.
It's 4 boxes. If there was one more.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying.
Look at.
Yes. So I think body language is definitely a part of it. That's a little harder to score. Let me think of what else. I think that processing time, and I'm not sure, I think that sort of picks up on those two components a little bit, but if you ask four people a question, the order that you will typically get an answer in is driver, expressive, analytical, amiable are going to kind of wobble back and forth just a little bit on who's going to be first and second. But that could be possibly one, kind of the processing time or response time. I think another would be written communication style. So I mentioned with with the assistant that I hired, bullet points were the way to go. I naturally, like my natural inclination, I'm going to type these paragraphs that are 14 miles long, and what I'm actually asking for is buried somewhere in the middle of it, because that's just, I type the way I talk. But I know she's going to bullet points, keep them short, sweet, and to the point. Same thing for drivers. So that could be another possible way to look at it. I'll have to think about that a little bit. That's a great question. I'm going to literally be thinking about that all day. So please give me your email address, because I'm going to, like at 2 this morning, you will probably get an email from me to say, oh, I thought of something else. So seriously, please give me your email address, because that's like an awesome question. Other questions? Yeah, did your hand go up or? Okay. Yes?
With these, the 4 personality communication styles, are there typical roles for each of those styles fit into an organization, your executive person?
There can be. I like to shy away from that a little bit, because just because I am an expressive, it doesn't mean I can't sit and look at a spreadsheet and make a analytical decision based on the data in front of me. There are positions that come more naturally. So for example, when I took my accounting classes in college, it was like, I had to prop my eyes open with toothpicks because it was like nails on a chalkboard to me. But when I took some of my like philosophy where we can just sit and talk about nothing and everything, I was all in. So there's definitely some things that are a little more natural, but I don't think it ever needs to be the point of saying, oh, you're this, so you can't be successful in this way, because everyone adapts and learns ways to flex. But I think if you were going to make generalizations, you're going to see a lot of HR directors who are amiables and expressives, probably more amiables, which drives me a little crazy sometimes, because sometimes that's one of the things, this is my personal soapbox, that keeps people from taking HR as seriously as it needs to, because sometimes there's a little indecision there, So, but I see a lot of my colleagues, former HR colleagues who are amiables. You're going to see a lot of your accountants and IT, some of the more technical roles that are going to be more analytical. However, what's interesting is once you get to the CFO level, you're going to see more drivers. And that's something that always kind of fascinates me, that within the accounting field, most people are analytical until you get to the person at the very top, which is fascinating for so many reasons. I could sit and go on and on about that. And for CEOs, it depends a lot on the culture of the company. So now that we're moving more to this, I don't know the right word for it, bring your dogs to work and everybody wear jeans, and we're going to have coffee shops in the workplace, which I love. Like, I'm not downing this, but that culture, as opposed to your stereotypical, like IBM back in the 1980s culture, you see a shift in the styles of CEOs, which I think is really interesting and important to acknowledge. So the person who was the successful CEO of XYZ Bank back in the 80s would not do well at some of these new, cool, hip, innovative, kind of companies that we have today. Yes?
I think that during different stages of your life, so losing a parent, changing jobs, that you can vastly change.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And some of that, as I talked about, sometimes in times of stress, you can see your secondary style come out, right? So it can be, losing a parent, changing, those are some stressful times. So sometimes you, for different reasons, feel like you need to take a seat back. And it's like, I just need to put my nose down and get this stuff done. Like, I just need to hammer through this. Or I'm really in my feelings, so I'm just going to sit and kind of honor that, and that's what I'm going to kind of do and be for right now. So absolutely, there's still a natural tendency. So even in those moments, for example, my father passed last year. So in general, I was this like driver, let me check things off, call this person, do this, do. But when all of my friends came over and brought multiple bottles of wine, I was my normal expressive self, because that was relaxing and that was real life for me. But yes, in those times you definitely see it. Yes?
On the second page, there's, it says for growth leads to, or analytical, it says decide. Does that mean they're indecisive?
Can be. It's the concept of analysis paralysis. So it doesn't mean that they are naturally indecisive. What it tends to mean is they want all the information to make sure they're making the right decision, but it's very rare, particularly in the workplace, that we ever have all the information. So sometimes it does get to the point that you have to say, you know what, I've got 90% of it and I need to act on that. Other questions? Yes?
And comparing a couple of close people, it seems to me that they share traits in a hemisphere.
Yes.
Is that common?
It is, yes. So if we go back to here, you're going to see within each of them, there are shares. So for example, the amiables and expressives, both of them show more emotion. So they naturally have a shared component. The same for analytical and driver. And then the driver and expressives naturally talk more and tell more than the analyticals and amiables. So that's absolutely the case. Other questions? All right, well, I think our time's about up. I'm going to skip my really cool story. The moral of the story was somebody asked me to do something. It was well within my power to do it, but because of the way they asked me, I said no, and literally told, my exact quote to them was, I could say yes, but the way you asked me is forcing me to say no. So I can give you a no now, or you can come back and approach me like I'm the Christy that you know. And they came back, and we got to a maybe. They still didn't quite get it right, but we got to a maybe. So we don't really have time for this, but later I want you to pull out your one question. Think about the person you have to ask that question to. Figure out what their style is, and knowing that, how are you going to approach them? In an ideal world, this person's your same style. You know, that would be awesome because it makes it that much easier. 75% chance, though, they're not. So think about knowing their style, how to tailor your ask, what information to lead with. Do you start with the question, or do you walk in and say, how was your weekend? What happened with Susie's soccer game? You know, whatever it may be, really think about what it is you need to do to get the outcome that you want, because that's the goal in all of our interactions. And that is it. Any other questions? All right. Thank you.
Really quickly, once again, Christy Pruitt-Haynes, she's an advisor here at the EC, and there's multiple ways that you can have the ability to kind of meet one-on-one and kind of dive deeper into this or into more HR topics. Yeah.
I did have a question. You mentioned you were going to email this out. Can you email this to us?
Yes, I will. I will email this presentation to you. If you will leave your email address.
I'll go grab a list that everyone that wants it can,
Perfect.
write their email.
He'll grab a list. Yes, what I'll do is with the email, I'll send the link that has all of that with it. Anything else? All right. Thank you all very much.